This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
Warning: this episode contains themes of child death. Listener discretion is advised.
All of a sudden, I heard screaming, yelling, Sophie and David running down the driveway with the look of terror and horror on their face. And I ran out the front and was confronted with this terrible sight of Tom, who was on the roadway. I did look at him and really have that epiphany moment that that was it.
I'm Georgia, and welcome to Finding Hope, the podcast that finds the good in the midst of the bad. Each episode, we meet someone who's had a bit of a hard road, but has found hope and healing along the way. And hopefully they inspire you to embrace the good in your world as well. Episode 19, McLaughlin. January 6th, 2014. McLaughlin was excited to be on a beach holiday with her husband, 3 children and parents-in-law. It was late afternoon and they began the short walk down to the beach from their accommodation, boogie boards in hand. Little did Michelle know it was about to become the worst day of her life. They never got to the beach. On the way there, Michelle's 4-year-old son Tom stepped in front of a 4-wheel drive. He died at the scene. Every parent's worst nightmare. 8 years on, Michelle has created something incredible out of her pain, and I'm honoured to have her on the podcast today to share her story. Michelle, tell me a little bit about yourself and your family.
So I'll be 50 this year. So I've been on the planet nearly, half a century. In that time, I've had a relatively happy life. Enjoyed childhood, growing up, attending a Catholic girls' school, and out of that, having many great friendships still to this day. And obviously, meeting my husband and marrying him and having 3 beautiful children, I was certainly blessed in that regard.
It's evident that even from the first 30 seconds of hearing Michelle talk, that she's really happy and grateful for her life. But it's been plagued by tragedy and deep grief, starting on January 6th, 2014.
At that point, I was 41 years of age. So my little boy, Tom, was killed in a pedestrian road crash when we were on a family holiday on the New South Wales Central Coast. We had hired a holiday house rental. We hadn't stayed in that area before, although I knew about it. The beautiful McMaster's Beach was where we were. And we arrived at the holiday property sort of just on dusk. So we weren't really familiar, I guess, with our surroundings. The next day was really hot, 40 plus degrees, and we were waiting for my in-laws, my husband's parents, David's parents, to arrive and spend a couple of days with us. They arrived and we had an early dinner, and the plan was to go down to the beach when things had cooled off a little bit. I have mentioned I have 3 children. So I have, at that point, Sophie, who was 7, Hugh, who had just turned 1, and then Tom, who was in the middle, who was 4. And so we're gathering in the process of gathering at the front of this property. Tom had gone to the front with his grandparents. Sophie and David were collecting surfboards and towels, and I was inside the holiday rental with Hugh and just sort of finishing up, giving him a little snack and putting him in his swimwear. And all of a sudden I heard screaming, yelling, Sophie and David running down the driveway with the look of terror and horror on their face. Immediately I'm thinking, perhaps something had happened to one of my in-laws, and I, ran out the front and was confronted with this terrible sight of Tom, who was on the roadway being worked on, resuscitated. I sort of immediately thought he's been hit by a car without being told. I could see, but I did look at him and really have that epiphany moment that that was it. I had been a nurse at Royal North Shore at that point for 19 years. I'd worked around the hospital and had quite extensive experience in health to note that, it was very unlikely Tom would probably survive, though you're still having hope. And sort of, 17 minutes later, the ambulance arrived and popped the defib, the paddles on him, looking for the heartbeat. And of course, it was just not there. It was a terribly traumatic experience for our family. Sort of the ongoings then for an hour or two with police and ambulance and travelling to the hospital mortuary, and my husband David and I just sitting in the back of that ambulance thinking, how did this happen? How can we be in this situation? We're a very safety conscious, hyper vigilant family, and I just couldn't believe that we were now faced with one of our children being killed in that manner. In the initial phases, I guess you are stunned, you are numb, you are devastated. I certainly couldn't eat, sleep, relax. You're sort of in that pacing mode. You're trying to come to grips with it. It's such a shocking thing. I liken it really to being, in the sense, if you were hit over the head with a cricket bat 10 times, it would probably be less painful. It's just such an awful place to be in that acute time thereafter. And as a parent, you're immediately, you've got to sort of put your feelings down a little bit, because in our sort of situation, we had a 7-year-old, we had a 1-year-old. Yes, the 1-year-old wasn't traumatised per se by it, but the 7-year-old really was. So it's putting then the child, first, and trying, I guess, to suppress some of your emotions. Like, I didn't want Sophie to see how, we were just so traumatised constantly. You were sort of holding in the tears, holding in the emotion for appropriate times. Yes, of course she saw some tears. There was a funeral for Tom, and she experienced that, and she spoke at his funeral. They were best friends, so you can imagine how heartbroken she really was. They shared a bedroom. It was very lonely for her. A few months into it, she would say, well, Mummy, I don't like going to bed because I just feel so lonely. I think about Tom, and, if you could imagine, Mummy, that if Daddy died, how would you like it if I said to you, please go to bed constantly, and it was a place where, you would lie there still and in the quiet. So it was hard, and physically for me, trying to cope with a young baby, I was so exhausted. Grief and bereavement is so tiring. Even if you do get some sleep, you've got this heavy weight in your heart, in your thoughts constantly. So, you're just looking for some lifelines, for some threads, for something to hang on to give you some hope.
What was that for you?
Well, I think once I got over the first probably 3 months of that intensity of the shock and the trauma and Of course you're sad, but there's only so many tears you can cry in a day. You can't constantly keep crying. You have to, in a situation where a young child dies and there's other siblings, there's got to be some sort of functionality. You've got to try to be able to get yourself back in some routines. Whilst that's very hard, you do have to think of the children and try to establish some routines again, even though you're dragging your feet and you're very tired. I guess to hope is not to escape the difficult, but it's being able to move forward with some courage despite the difficult. You've really got to dig deep and find courage at times like that. I never thought our lives would be impacted by the death of one of our children. Nobody ever thinks bad things would happen to them. Sometimes those things are out of our control. As careful as you are, as hypervigilant as you are, in our situation with Tom, he was just standing on this council verge and he just took 2 steps which placed him in front of a 4-wheel drive. So there was timing, there was things in the environment, the speed the vehicle was travelling at 50 kilometres per hour. It's not sustainable with life for a small child, or in fact an adult. You've got a 0 to 10% chance of surviving if you're hit by a car that's travelling at more than 50 kilometres per hour or greater.
Grief had changed Michelle and her family irreparably. And soon after Tom's death, she left her 19-year nursing career for good.
I was really struggling. I had been quite good at my job and enjoyed it very much. And I felt so traumatised internally. Looking after other people, there's a great responsibility in that. You're giving out medications, you're looking after their safety, and you have to be obviously quite personable with that. And the way that I didn't feel that I could give people the best care. At that point in my job, I used to see somewhere between 25 and I think at the most 45 patients in a day. I was a dermatology clinical nurse consultant, so it was a huge workload and a huge responsibility. So at that point I felt, it was in everybody's interest, not just my own, that I stopped nursing.
But Michelle wasn't done. She channeled her grief into something that would not only change lives, but honour her son, Tom, in the process. Tell me all about the Little Blue Dinosaur, because I think this is just an incredible foundation that you've started.
So Little Blue Dinosaur was established in late 2014. Tom died in January that year. After he died, we went through a coronial inquest into obviously looking at some of the factors that I believed should be discussed and brought to the attention of, people in charge of road safety in this country. So holiday time road safety, going to places like we did that are quite beautiful, and we go there because of that. There's low to not much infrastructure at all. So there's not safe crossing points. There's no curb and gutter in a lot of those beach hamlet type areas where, it just sweeps from grass to roadway. There's no separation. There's no clear, obvious demarcation. There's no footpaths. Children rely heavily on visual cues to help keep them safe. But on top of that, I've also learnt that they have cognitive issues in terms of their peripheral vision's not fully developed, their hearing in terms of judging, where a vehicle's origin's coming from, the higher thinking skills of speed and distance. If, they see the car coming, how long have they got to cross? That's quite hard for them to discern. And their reflexes are slower. So you can shout as much as you like for them to stop. Their brain is obviously, their ears hear the message, their brain processes it, but their body is still moving forward for a few steps, which can place them in quite a perilous position. And whereas an adult, if we call them to halt immediately, our reflexes are quick and sharp. we will do that unless we're distracted by something else, but normally we will do that. So children are also small in stature. They can be concealed, like in holiday areas where we were. The street had lots of cars parked up and down it because it was only a 200-metre walk down to the beach. It had lots of beautiful, obviously, shrubbery, again, concealing. So we wanted to obviously talk about and educate people about holiday time road safety, and also the fact that young children can be unpredictable. They are often focused on the fun, the next thing. Recreation's exciting. Well, what were we were doing? We're about to go down to the beach and have a swim, take surfboards. Tom had got a little boogie board for Christmas from Santa. He was very keen about using it. So those other factors also come into it. So we say to people, when you go on holidays, you need to show the children how the roadway looks different from what they might know at home. Show them where they need to stand to keep safe. And most importantly, that every parent and carer needs to know, is you must hold their hand and restrain them up till the age of 10. A lot of people stop holding their children's hand, and I know that from doing presentations. When I'm asking that question, a lot of the hands have gone down. By the time the child's about 6, 7, 8, parents are no longer doing that. And it's examples of that every day I see in my community. Children riding bikes, scootering, unsupervised, well under the age of 10, roaming around the streets in the neighbourhood, allowed to walk to school on their own. And I think if parents understood more about the cognitive and physical limitations they have, and even the perception about crossing roads safely, there's not always crossings, there's not always sets of lights to press. Oftentimes on local roads, they've got to cross and work out for themselves how to get over safely. And I think roadways are such complex areas. They are changing second to second. They are hard for most adults to navigate. And I think, in saying that, I was so shocked by what happened to Tom that I had always talked to him about road safety. He used to tell our neighbour's cat, if it was sitting on the middle of the road, "Get off the road, Queenie, you'll be run over." Those things run through my head often still today, where I try to make sense of it, of what happened to Tom. And I think there's just no sense in it at all. It was a moment in time, at the perfect storm of circumstances. It can happen to anyone, but I think, if people are more educated around child road safety and their capacity for that, and also the fact that the most common cause of death of children in Australia, aged 1 to 14, is road trauma. A lot of people don't know that. And there are thousands of children injured every single year. So we set up Little Blue Dinosaur Foundation. We work with local, state and federal government. We do signage and media campaigns around holiday times. We have 63 council partners in 4 Australian states, and we have this beautiful, colourful signage that, is designed to attract the attention of children, parents and motorists, with these messages that are fully government endorsed: hold my hand and slow down kids around. During those holiday times, particularly Christmas, because it's a 6-week period where there's children en masse in our communities, they're travelling to these beach hamlets, and certainly in COVID times, that's what we can all do. And we go to these places where the local population sometimes triples. So you've got more cars, more people, more risk of accidents, or I should say crashes, happening.
Just incredible, the work you're doing. I've seen these signs around, and they're really great. And you should be really, really proud of what this foundation's managed to do. Not only that, but late last year, you launched something that will actually help grieving families who have lost someone to road trauma. Can you tell me about these road trauma grief support packages?
So that's come out of our own personal experience, how tough it was with the day-to-day functioning. Look, everyone's around for the first few weeks, and then life goes back to normal and you find yourself on your own. People obviously not wanting to intrude or, see you upset or upset you by something they fear, what they might say could upset you, or not mention the person's name because they fear that's going to make you fall apart. And so you sort of become a little bit isolated and you're trying to function at the same time. So the grief support packs, I know David and I struggled with the routines, and we were lucky to have some friends who organised grocery deliveries and house cleaning and that kind of thing with our grief trauma packs we'd be giving to parents would be, meal kits, grocery deliveries, car washes, domestic cleaning, gardening, those things that you just struggle with because you've got to maintain the house, the cleanliness, the jobs need to be done, the meals need to be prepped and cooked, but you don't often feel like doing it. You struggle. So any little help that's, practical like that is a godsend.
I think that's such a wonderful idea as well, because I think this is just for grief in general. So many people ask, how can I help? And you put the onus back on the grieving person to take up brain capacity to think, oh, well, I don't know, like just providing, the meal kits or the house cleaning. I think these trauma support packages are amazing, but also just great advice for people who are supporting someone who is grieving to just help in that really practical way.
Even the babysitting or offering to help there, because I know we went to counselling for 3 years and every Wednesday I'd have to think, who can I find to look after Sophie and Hugh while we dash off for an hour and a half by the time we drove there and returned home. So then the burden of the counselling, which you desperately need, it becomes a worry of how you're actually going to attend as frequently as you need to. With grieving parents, I know that there is obviously 2 roads you can take. And some people, statistically, the marriages can break up. They can, depend on drugs and alcohol. There's this situation where stress on the body, and certainly studies have shown where grieving parents have been more predisposed to getting cardiovascular diseases, cancers. It's got this incredible trauma associated with it. So the mental health side of matters, the trauma and the depression and anxiety that comes from this really deeply affects people for the rest of their lives. And in, Little Blue Dinosaur, yes, I do practical things with signage and road safety, but I also want to do this support for families and this, really on a practical level to provide the assistance. As I say, after the funeral and the dust settled, life goes on, and you feel alone. You can be struggling and sort of left to it, really. So the more tools and things we can give practically to families who experience this trauma, the better.
Michelle is so passionate about supporting families going through loss, ensuring that other people's experiences aren't harder than they need to be. But for that, she needs a community of people, of businesses, willing to step up.
We're going to need some sponsors to help us with our grief packs, and say we would need, one per week to be sent out to a family so that they could use that grief care pack over the 12 months. We need to get people in our community on board with that. Some of the big people like Coles and Woolworths and RGA, babysitting services, any of the car wash people. I've been on the media campaign trail over the Christmas talking about this, and yet we haven't had one person in the corporate world get in contact with me, which is quite disappointing when you think about the revenue that's raised every hour across this country by some of these big companies like Coles and Woolworths. Surely they could spare some assistance for families who are suffering and losing children. It's one of the greatest traumas and most stressful events that any human being could ever go through. It's a massive amount of suffering, and we need to support people and care for them and give them things that are helpful.
Well, this is the moment where I break that fourth wall and put a call out to you. If you or your business or someone you know is willing to help out Michelle and Little Blue Dinosaur Foundation with these packages, she would love to hear from you. You can get in touch with the show, and also all the details of Little Blue Dinosaur are in the show notes. Michelle talks a lot about the isolation of being a grieving parent. So I asked her if she had any words of wisdom for those that may be going through the loss of their own child.
Losing a child, it's a great loss. It's not just a loss, it is a great loss. And I can't sort of stress enough, I guess, to families to reach out in terms of finding support and, those friends that you can count on one hand, really, who will be there with you ongoing, not just the fair weather ones, the ones that are there with you through thick and thin. You need to really align yourself to those. It's easy to become socially isolated and not want to bother with people, or to, I guess, blame and anger comes into bereavement too, and you have to work your way through a lot of emotions trying to understand what's happened, and you are going forward into the future whether you like it or not. So you've got to really help yourself. I used to read lots of little quotes to help me, and I know people used to say, "You'll be okay, Michelle and David. You're fine, you're strong." You don't feel strong at all. You're on your knees. I know I would have given my own life for Tom to be spared. I'd had a wonderful life up until that point, of losing him. And he had 4 years of life. And you think, how's that fair? That makes you feel very angry and hurt. And it's easy to want to blame other people, but nobody has any intent of anything terrible happening to a family member. Or even when you're running through your head over what happened and you think, God, in my case, if only I'd been out the front of that house, but I wasn't. And you can torture yourself on and on with all those things that come into your thoughts, and it's not helpful. The fact is it's happened, and, you're finding ways to help yourself. I'm a Catholic, obviously. I mentioned earlier that I went to a Catholic girls' school. You have to have faith in the sense that, there's going to be a better day. When that comes, I don't know. But you have to try and find happy moments in a day. You want to think, God did this. Why would he want my son? I had relatives say to me, "Oh, he's a little flower in God's garden now." And I used to think to myself, are you serious? He needs to be in my garden. He was 4 years old. Crashes, accidents, loss of life goes on around the world every minute. Someone's dying, someone's being born. Nobody asks for terrible things to happen to them. But I always sort of felt God's presence. He was putting strength into me to help me cope. He couldn't take it away. He didn't cause it. He's not this mythical being up in the sky with, a thunderbolt coming out of his finger saying, "Your turn today." No, but I think he's very much with us in our suffering. And certainly I sometimes have thought, how could I have thought up all these things like Little Blue Dinosaur Foundation? I was inspired.
It takes courage to remain steadfast in faith when grief can easily overcome you. But Michelle did. And she kept seeing signs of God in little moments.
Tom, my son, used to love drawing dinosaurs. From the time he was 2, they sort of evolved. They were little green blobs, and then they sort of evolved into what was a very clear dinosaur, which has become our foundation logo. That was probably one of the last drawings that Tom ever did. But after he passed away, I found them in little notepads and in colouring in books, and I used to think, God, these little blue dinosaurs, they had dots on them and a little smile and the big eyelash, just gorgeous. And I thought, oh, that's him telling me in his own little way, Mummy, pull yourself together. You really are capable of lots of good things, and you could do this thing that is so important and would prevent other little children from being injured or killed, and it gives you that purpose and meaning. And I really believe Little Blue Dinosaur is Tom's work. It's his way of helping us still today, and I carry him very close. A lot of this grief and bereavement theories, you probably be familiar with some of them about, the phases you go through and coming to this acceptance, which is very hard, particularly where a little child's concerned. But I sort of believe in the attachment stays to the person. It's not that you sort of think, oh, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and keep going, and we put it all down to one side and bury our feelings around it. I always talk about Tom. I like people to talk to me about Tom. Still, he's been gone 8 years. It's a long time for most people, 8 years, and they think perhaps you're over it or you'll get through it. You don't. You've got that loss to carry for your lifetime, but it's the way you do it in a purposeful, meaningful way, and I've tried to do that.
Michelle, what was Tom like?
He was just a child that enjoyed life. He always had a spring in his step. He was always excited. Mummy, what are we going to do today? What can we go and see? He was very loving towards our family, particularly me. I was with him all the time. So he would be often on my knee, or, if I was in the bathroom, he'd be banging on the door. Come on. What are you doing? I'm waiting for you. I've got plans for today. He would introduce me to people in elevators down at the shops. And my other son, Hugh, who was super proud of, Tom obviously just had Hugh for the year before he passed away, but he really wanted a baby brother. He loves Sophie too, of course, but he did want the brother. So he was thrilled when he was born. So he was always making sure Hugh was very comfortable. He had his dummy, he was warm enough. He needed a cuddle and a kiss about every 2 minutes. He wanted to be with him constantly. And to the point where I'd have to say, the baby's got to sleep, darling. You've got to let him go for a while. So, what was he like? Well, he was just full of happiness, joy. He was loving. He was just beautiful. He was gorgeous on the outside. He had these big brown teddy bear eyes and this soft sandy hair, a beautiful olive skin, but he was so sweet-natured and caring. And his kindergarten teacher, or preschool teacher, she used to say to me, he's the first one on the scene in the playground if someone falls. And he will bring them to me and start telling me, how to care for this particular injury that they've sustained. And I always think, oh, he's a nurse's son. But he was also himself. He was very caring. And again, that foundation, Little Blue Dinosaur, is a reflection of Tom, who he was.
Thank Thank you so much to Michelle McLaughlin for sharing her story and Tom's story so vulnerably and courageously. To find out more about Little Blue Dinosaur and how you can get involved, that information is in the show notes. The next episode will drop in 2 weeks' time, shedding light on something that is all too common in many relationships, but often quietly hiding under the surface, and that is emotional abuse. For now, I'll leave you with this verse in honour of Tom. Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." Matthew 19, verse 14. Catch you next time.
This is a Hope 1032 production. Thanks for listening.